You know, when you hear the name Billy the Kid, it kind of conjures up those classic images, right? The steely gaze, that cocked pistol, the iconic hat. But how much of that is the real Billy, and how much is just, well, the myth that's kind of sprung up around him? And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We're going deep into the life and legend and all those enduring mysteries surrounding this iconic outlaw. We've got some great source material to work with today. Excerpts from the American History Tellers podcast that they actually sat down with Chris Wimmer, the host of Legends of the Old West. So get ready for a deep dive into the life, the legend, and the enduring mysteries surrounding Billy the Kid.
You know, it always strikes me that Billy's story, along with so many other outlaws from the American West, it really has this almost magnetic pull on people's imaginations, don't you think?
Yeah, it totally does. It's not just a local thing either, right? I mean, there's something about these American outlaws that seems to resonate worldwide. So what do you think it is about this particular time and this particular place that makes these stories so universally captivating?
I think the American West represents this potent cocktail of freedom, rebellion, and this almost mythical sense of wide open spaces where anything was possible.
Right.
It was this period where the old rules didn't quite apply and individuals could really carve their own destinies, for better or for worse.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, it's like the frontier itself becomes a symbol, this vast, untamed landscape that sort of mirrors this desire to break free from all of the constraints of society.
Exactly. And when you layer in the very real dangers and hardships of frontier life, I mean, the constant threat of violence, the struggle for survival, you get this potent breeding ground for these larger-than-life characters.
Right. Larger than life. And a lot of those characters end up on the big screen, right? I'm guessing a lot of you listening might have first encountered Billy the Kid through movies like Young Guns.
Young Guns, yeah, a classic. It definitely captured the spirit of the era, even if it took some creative liberties with the historical facts. They definitely amped up the drama,
Especially in the final act.
oh, for sure, for sure. The filmmakers, they definitely weren't afraid to embellish things. I mean, they cast actors who were significantly older than their real life counterparts, like Jack Palance as Lawrence Murphy, and Terrence Stamp as John Tunstall.
And that's an important thing to remember, right? The myth making around Billy the Kid. It wasn't just a Hollywood invention. Even during his lifetime, newspaper accounts painted very, very different pictures of him. Some portraying him as this cold-blooded killer, others as this sort of folk hero.
Well, even back then, there was this struggle to separate fact from fiction, which makes you wonder how historians even begin to untangle a figure like Billy the Kid. It's a real challenge. It's like trying to assemble a puzzle where some pieces are missing, some are damaged, and some might not even belong to the same puzzle at all.
Right.
That's why historians are. Frederick Nolan and Robert Utley, who are really considered leading authorities on Billy the Kid. They're so important because they really dig deep, comparing primary sources, cross-referencing accounts, and trying to sift through all those layers of myth and legend to get to some semblance of the truth.
Okay, so let's try to do that ourselves beyond the Hollywood version and all those sensationalized newspaper accounts. Who is the real Billy the Kid? Where did this outlaw saga even begin?
Well, like so many who ended up on the wrong side of the law, Billy's early life was certainly a factor. Born Henry McCarty, he faced hardship from a very young age. He lost his father when he was just a kid, and his mother later died from tuberculosis. So this constant uprooting and this instability, it definitely left its mark.
Yeah, I can imagine. That sort of early life would leave anyone feeling, I don't know, vulnerable.
Adrift, absolutely. And this brings us to Silver City, New Mexico, a real turning point in Billy's story. He was still just a teenager then, already caught up in a world that wasn't exactly offering him many good choices.
So what happened in Silver City? Was this his first brush with the law?
It was. He got involved with a group of questionable characters, let's say, and ended up participating in a petty theft. Now, this was back in 1877. And the local lawman, likely as a scare tactic more than anything else, jailed him for the crime. But Billy, probably terrified, broke out of jail. And that seemingly minor act set off a chain of events that would reshape his destiny.
So it wasn't this grand act of rebellion, more like a panicked reaction. That kind of inadvertently set him on this path to becoming an outlaw.
Precisely. And once that label of outlaw was attached to him, his options. They narrowed dramatically. He fell in with others on the fringes of society, learning how to survive outside the law. What might have started as acts of desperation gradually morphed into a way of life, almost like he'd resigned himself to this outlaw identity.
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? The idea that a single, seemingly small choice can have such enormous unintended consequences.
It really is. And it reminds us that history is often made up of these pivotal moments where individuals, caught in the currents of their time, make choices that ripple outward, shaping not only their own lives, but the course of events around them.
Yeah. We're getting a much clearer picture now of the forces that really shaped Billy the Kid. But of course, we can't ignore the darker side of his story. He was involved in numerous shootouts and killings. And while some might try to romanticize this aspect of his life, it's crucial to acknowledge the real cost of that violence.
You're absolutely right. The violence of the Wild West, it wasn't some thrilling spectacle. It had devastating consequences. And one event that really brings this home is the killing of Tom O'Folliard, one of Billy's closest friends. This happened in December of 1880, when Pat Garrett, who had recently been elected sheriff of Lincoln County, was determined to bring Billy and his gang to justice.
I've heard about this. Garrett set a trap for them at Fort Sumner, right?
He did. Garrett and his posse concealed themselves around the fort, waiting for Billy and his gang to walk right into their ambush. Late that night, shrouded in fog, Billy and his men rode into town completely unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows.
Wow. Sounds like a scene straight out of a movie. I can almost picture the tension, the fog swirling around them.
The atmosphere must have been incredibly thick. With anticipation, Garrett called out to them, demanding their surrender. But instead of complying, Billy and his men opened fire, and the night erupted in this chaotic gun battle.
So they were essentially caught in a crossfire, bullets flying from every direction. That must have been terrifying.
Absolutely chaotic. Imagine the deafening roar of gunfire, the flashes of muzzle fire illuminating the fog, the desperate scramble for cover. Somehow Billy and his gang managed to escape. But sadly, Tom O'Folliard wasn't so lucky.
What happened to Tom?
He was mortally wounded.
Yeah.
During the shootout, according to some accounts, he died cursing Pat Garrett with his last breaths. A tragic end that really underscores the brutal realities of life in the Wild West.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that these weren't romanticized gunfights. They were violent encounters with lasting consequences. And this brings us to one of the most enduring mysteries surrounding Billy the Kid, his death at the hands of Pat Garrett. There's always been some debate about how it all went down.
The lack of reliable eyewitnesses and the reliance on Garrett's own account have fueled speculation for well over a century. We have to consider that history is often written by the victors, and Garrett's version of events naturally became the dominant narrative. But there are gaps, inconsistencies, a lack of corroborating evidence that leave room for doubt.
And then there's the whole Brushy Bill Roberts saga, which throws another wrench into the works. This is for those who might not be familiar. Brushy Bill claimed to be Billy the Kid, insisting he'd somehow survived that encounter with Garrett and lived under an assumed identity for years.
It's a fascinating story, isn't it? Brushy Bill's claims, they're intriguing, but are also riddled with inconsistencies and factual errors that make it hard to take them at face value. Still, the fact that this alternative narrative exists speaks volumes about the power of mystery and our desire
to believe in the possible.
Cheating death.
I think it speaks to something else too. The enduring power of myth and legend, particularly when it comes to figures like Billy the Kid. The very idea that he might have outwitted his pursuers and lived to a ripe old age adds this extra layer of intrigue to his story.
You're right. It makes you wonder if we'd be as fascinated if we knew every detail with absolute certainty. Does the mystery itself enhance the legend?
It's a question worth pondering, and perhaps we'll revisit it later. But for now, let's shift gears a bit and delve into the world that shaped Billy the Kid, the American West, in all its complexity and contradictions.
That sounds like a great place to pick up our conversation. The Wild West, it wasn't just a backdrop for Billy's story. It was a force that shaped him. And countless others. It's fascinating how Billy's story is. It's so intertwined with this broader narrative of the American West. You almost can't separate the man from the myths and legends that have sprung up around this particular period. In American history.
Yeah, that's so true. It makes you wonder if Billy the Kid would even become such an iconic figure if he had lived in a different time or place?
It's a great question. I think the American West, with its unique combination of lawlessness and opportunity, these vast landscapes, this clash of cultures, created this fertile ground for these larger-than-life characters to emerge. It was this time of immense change and upheaval where the rules were still being written, and individuals could really make or break their own destinies.
And that idea of forging your own destiny, of living outside the confines of society, that's something that really seems to capture people's imaginations, even today.
Absolutely. It speaks to this primal yearning for freedom, for self-reliance, for the chance to escape the constraints of civilization and strike out on your own path. It's a powerful idea. And I think that's why outlaw figures like Billy the Kid continue to fascinate us.
You know, in the podcast, Chris Wimmer talked about Billy as a young man who was thrust into the outlaw life through circumstance. He really emphasized how those early experiences, especially that incident in the Silver City, set him on a course he might never have chosen otherwise.
That's such a crucial point. Silver City wasn't just a random event. It was a turning point that had this ripple effect on the rest of his life. You know, we often think of outlaws as deliberately choosing that life, but in Billy's case, it seems like he was almost pushed into it by a series of events beyond his control.
Makes you wonder how many other outlaws throughout history were driven to that life by circumstance rather than some inherent desire to break the law.
It's a question worth considering, and it speaks to the complexity of human behavior, doesn't it? We like to categorize people as good or bad, hero or villain, but the reality is often much more nuanced than that.
Of course, acknowledging the complexities of Billy's life doesn't excuse the choices he made, some of which were undeniably violent and had tragic consequences.
Well,
we have to hold that tension, right? Yeah. Recognizing both the forces that shaped him and the responsibility he bore for his own actions.
Absolutely. We can't romanticize the violence of the Wild West, and the killing of Tom O'Folliard serves as a stark reminder of that.
Yeah. That scene Wimmer described with Tom dying in the saddle, it really paints this visceral picture of how dangerous and unpredictable life was back then. It wasn't just cowboys and gunslingers having friendly duels at high noon. It was a world where violence could erupt at any moment, often with devastating results.
And it's a far cry from how those gunfights were often portrayed in those classic Hollywood westerns, isn't it?
Right. It's like we've gone through this evolution in how we portray the Wild West. I mean, those John Wayne films presented a very sanitized, romanticized version with clear-cut heroes and villains, but in recent years, we've seen a shift towards more gritty, realistic depictions. Think of shows like Deadwood or 1883.
I think that shift reflects a broader cultural trend towards acknowledging the complexities of history. We're less interested in simple narratives and more willing to grapple with the messy, often contradictory truths of the past.
So are these newer, grittier westerns closer to the truth, or are they just romanticizing the era in a different way?
It's probably a bit of both. Even the most well-researched historical drama still takes creative liberties. But I think these more realistic depictions, by showing the brutality and the moral ambiguity of the Wild West, they can spark curiosity and encourage us to delve deeper into the historical record.
Yeah. And that's what we're all about here, encouraging people to dig a little deeper, to go beyond the surface and uncover those hidden truths that challenge the narratives we've been told.
Exactly. History isn't a static thing. It's a conversation that's constantly evolving as we uncover new evidence and re-examine the past through different lenses.
And speaking of uncovering hidden truths, Chris Wimmer mentioned a figure we haven't discussed yet, John Wesley Hardin. Wimmer described him as a cold-blooded killer who makes even Billy the Kid look like a choir boy. He seems like a stark counterpoint to Billy's narrative.
Hardin's he's a fascinating character and a chilling reminder that the Wild West wasn't all about adventure and freedom. It was a place where lawlessness could easily descend into brutality and where individuals like Hardin could exploit that lawlessness for their own gain.
And it's important to remember the victims in all of this. Amidst all the talk of outlaws and gunfights, it's easy to forget that there were real people whose lives were tragically cut short or irrevocably altered by the violence that was so prevalent back then.
You're right. We can't lose sight of the human cost of this period in history, and perhaps by examining figures like John Wesley Hardin alongside someone like Billy the Kid, we can gain a more balanced and nuanced understanding of the Wild West.
Holding up two different mirrors to the same era, seeing both the allure of freedom and the dark underbelly of lawlessness reflected back at us.
That's a great way to put it, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the complexities of history, and the dangers of romanticizing the past.
So with all that said, what do you think draws us to these stories? Why do we keep coming back to the Wild West, to figures like Billy the Kid and John Wesley Hardin, even with all the violence and moral ambiguity that surrounds them?
I think it's that same impulse that draws us to any good story, that fascination with characters who live on the edge, who defy convention, who embody both our deepest fears and our wildest dreams. But it's also about more than just entertainment. These stories offer us a glimpse into a pivotal moment in American history, a time of rapid change and profound transformation that continues to shape our national identity.
It's like looking into a mirror, seeing both the best and worst of ourselves reflected back at us.
Exactly. And in that reflection, we can find valuable lessons about the human condition, about the consequences of our choices, about the enduring power of myth and legend to shape how we understand ourselves and our place in the world.
Speaking of myth and legend, let's circle back to Billy the Kid for a moment. The podcast mentioned a young woman named Paulina Maxwell, who was said to have been smitten with Billy. It's a detail that adds this almost romantic element to his otherwise gritty story.
The story of Billy the Kid and Paulina Maxwell is definitely one that captures the imagination. It's like a Romeo and Juliet tale set against the backdrop of the Wild West.
But how much truth is there to it? Was there a genuine connection between them, or is it just another example of history being embellished over time?
Like so much else about Billy's life. The details are murky. We know Paulina was the sister of Pete Maxwell, the man. Billy is ultimately killed. Some accounts claim they were romantically involved. Even that Paulina might have been pregnant with Billy's child at the time of his death.
Now that's a dramatic twist.
It certainly adds to the intrigue. However, it's important to note that those claims are based largely on speculation and hearsay. Paulina herself later denied having a relationship with Billy, though she admitted to being infatuated with him.
So we're left with conflicting accounts and no definitive answers. It's like history is asking us to fill in the blanks ourselves, to decide what we want to believe.
And that's the beauty of engaging with the past, isn't it? It's not always about finding definitive answers. It's about wrestling with the ambiguities, pondering the possibilities, and ultimately forming our own interpretations based on the evidence we have.
It sounds like we need to be careful about accepting any single version of events as the absolute truth, even with figures like Billy the Kid, whose life has been so thoroughly scrutinized. There's still room for debate and interpretation.
Absolutely right. And that's why engaging with history requires a healthy dose of skepticism and a willingness to challenge the narratives we've been given.
Yeah, it seems like with Billy the Kid, the lines between fact and fiction are just perpetually blurred. Even something as seemingly straightforward as a romantic relationship becomes shrouded in all this mystery and speculation. That's so true. And in a way, it makes his story even more compelling, don't you think? It invites us to become active participants in the historical process.
Right.
To weigh the evidence, to consider different perspectives, and to draw our own conclusions.
It definitely makes you realize that history isn't just this collection of dry facts and dates. It's a tapestry woven from countless individual stories, each with its own mysteries, ambiguities, unanswered questions.
I love that analogy. It's like we're all detectives trying to piece together a puzzle, knowing we'll never have all the pieces. But that's what makes the search so rewarding, right? The thrill of discovery, the challenge of interpretation, the realization that history is an ongoing conversation, not a finished product.
Exactly. And speaking of that ongoing conversation, as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into the world of Billy the Kid, I'm curious to know what stands out to you the most. Has your own perspective on him shifted at all throughout this exploration? For me, it's the constant push and pull between the man and the myth. On the one hand, we have Henry McCarty, this young man who faced incredible hardship and was thrust into this life of violence and desperation. On the other hand, we have Billy the Kid, this iconic outlaw figure who embodies freedom, rebellion, the allure of the Wild West, and somewhere in between, those two extremes, lies the historical truth, complex and elusive.
It reminds us that even the most legendary figures were once real people with their own hopes, fears, and motivations. And it's a reminder that history is full of these gray areas, these spaces where good and evil, right and wrong, are not always so easily defined.
Right. I think that's a really important takeaway, especially in our current age of instant information and simplified narratives. It's so easy to get caught up in the black and white, the heroes and villains, but the reality is rarely that simple.
So how do we, as people interested in history, and navigate that complexity? How do we find the truth amidst all the myth making and conflicting accounts?
I think it comes down to curiosity, skepticism, and a willingness to embrace ambiguity. We have to be willing to question the narratives we've been given. To seek out multiple perspectives. To dig deeper into the historical record and challenge our own assumptions.
It's about recognizing that there's always more to the story than meets the eye. And that, even with figures like Billy the Kid, who have been the subject of countless books, films, articles, there's still room for discovery and reinterpretation.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes history so fascinating. It's a living, breathing thing that continues to evolve as we uncover new evidence and ask new questions. Well said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. Don't be afraid to challenge the narratives you encounter, whether it's about Billy the Kid or any other historical figure or event. Dig deeper, explore different perspectives, and remember that history is an ongoing conversation, not a closed book.
And for those who are eager to learn more about the Wild West and the people who shaped it, I highly recommend checking out Chris Wimmer's podcast, Legends of the Old West. He's a master storyteller who brings these historical figures and events to life in a captivating and informative way.
It's a great resource for anyone who wants to go beyond the Hollywood version of the Wild West and delve into the fascinating, often contradictory realities of that era.
And ultimately, I think that's what it's all about, engaging with the past in a way that sparks our curiosity, deepens our understanding, and perhaps even challenges our assumptions about the world we live in today.
So, until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds sharp. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of Billy the Kid.